You can't keep using tools of oppression and expect to raise free people.
Fire!
Welcome to episode 120, episode 120. And we are deeply immersed in the Do Better series. And this is such a great opportunity. I mentioned to y'all, I think last week, that I had an email exchange that really got me going in a not so awesome way. But I am deciding to use this as an opportunity to hopefully help some folks do better, right? So I'm not going to use the name of this person. This was an email that I got from someone who listened to episode 115. If you're not familiar with that episode, we were talking about white people in Black and brown spaces and some of the things that they can do to not center themselves and to include more leadership from Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that sort of thing. Y'all know what we talk about on here. And I got a response from this guy who I've spoken to before, and he was grateful for the episode, talked about some of the things that he was doing to address those issues we talked about. And then I'm going to read this part to y'all. He said, "Hello, I'm sure you won't be surprised to know that I felt you looking right at me as you advised well-intentioned white folks to make certain that they were engaged at more than a token level with the people they were intending to serve when they, for example, try to establish programs in the heart of Black communities." So he mentioned that he's on a steep learning curve, working it out, totally understanding. He went on to explain some of the things that he's doing about that. Then he said, "On another front, there is work to be done beyond where white folks can improve. Our parents and staff are subjected daily to the demeaning commands of the staff of the daycare facility that shares the building where we currently reside. To hear these Black men and women scream, 'Up against the wall,' to their mostly Black 3- and 4-year-old charges who are waiting to use the bathroom is enough to break our hearts. The same goes with shouts of, 'Stop crying, what are you crying about?' to similarly young ones who would be missing their mom or dad, or maybe missing their mom or dad, or having to go to the bathroom, blah, blah. In short, you don't have to be white to not know how to live compassionately with young people of color. There is work to be done for everyone all around." And then he goes on to thank me again for the episode. So couched inside of his gratitude and his expression of what he was doing was this idea that Black folks needed to be doing work too. So I'm going to read y'all my response. It was kind of short. "Dear," his name, "thank you for listening and sharing your thoughts and blah, 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 blah. I must say, I find it disconcerting that you said you don't have to be white to not know how to live compassionately with young people of color." End quote. Obviously, we all need to do this work, which is why I have an entire podcast and related works dedicated to BIPOC folks doing the work. It feels like you're deflecting, or in a way sliding those Black people in front of you like, "Hey, they're doing something wrong too, see?" I know firsthand that many Black children are oppressed and berated by other Black people. I also know that much of this is rooted in fears that came from how white people treated Black adults and Black children. It is not okay. And we both know that. So I'm wondering what relevance it has in your message here. Were you thinking that this is something I didn't know or that I didn't address it enough? I'm genuinely asking and looking forward to your response. So his response was a diatribe that basically took zero responsibility and essentially told me that I didn't understand and that I needed to be basically listening for the love in what he was saying. And then he ended it with this, and I may quote some other aspects, but I'm going to read this part verbatim. "One final related point. On the same day that I received your email, I saw the New York Times obituary online regarding the recent death of one of my favorite college professors." And then he put a link. It was from, and I won't say the professor's name, that I first heard a critical word about a Black person from someone who wasn't prejudiced. He made a big deal out of the fact that one of the major facilitators of slavery was the fact that many African tribal leaders were perfectly willing to make a lot of money off of selling their people or their neighbors to the slavers. Many of those taken into slavery were not captured by whites, but by their own people. That was shocking information for me. My ignorance knew no bounds still. I certainly hope that by introducing this last point, I'm not repeating my previous act of writing unclearly. In sum, my point is that at the name of their center, we are concerned with the way everyone speaks to everyone else, regardless of our personal circumstances. So I shared this email from a space of deep frustration with my family, with Chris and with Marley and Sage, and they agreed to talk about it here on the podcast. So thank you, Chris, Marley, and Sage, for being here with us on this episode. I just wanted to share your thoughts on why this is problematic and maybe what should have been done as opposed to what actually happened.
I just wanted to start with the first email, actually, which is the first quote that you read, saying that you don't have to be white to not know how to live with POC youths compassionately. That was what you said, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
It was just very confusing to read for me because I never took anything you said in that sort of way. And then later, seeing him say that he wrote unclearly confused me. Especially because it wasn't like a metaphor he was using. He said what was happening, and unless he was wrong and those weren't kids or something,
what was unclear.
It's irrelevant.
Yes. So that was Sage speaking, by the way.
Yeah.
I've heard that whole conversation so many times, or that whole approach so many times. It's difficult to talk about it, but I will. Let's talk about it. So I don't understand why every time I hear something like that, it makes me remember all lives matter. So the concept of Black Lives Matter is not to say that no one else is dealing with anything like this. A group of people are speaking to their experience. For you to come in and say, well, see, other people deserve the same level of blah, 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 blah. It's not only being dismissive, but it's also, again, centering yourself in something that has nothing to do with you. If it's not I can't. All right, let me see if I can make this simpler. The idea of saying, basically, Black people do this too. Black people have issues when they talk to younger Black children. It's definitely a deflection. Just deal with what we're talking about. Clearly, we're all people. And nobody's saying that we as a race have the answer in dealing with our children. That wasn't the approach. Or that's not what I took from the episode or your comments with him.
Right.
It was never coming from a place of, well, y'all are the ones doing it wrong, so y'all need to do better in dealing with us. It's that same mode in like crime and violence. Well, cops kill Black people, Black children, Black women, Black men. Well, yeah, they kill white people too. It happens. We're not saying it doesn't happen. We're just saying it's disproportionately happening to us. That's our statement. That's what we're talking about. For you now to come along and say, well, they kill white people too. To me, it feels a lot like someone patting you on your back and going, you're being too emotional. You're being too sensitive, especially nowadays. Like that seems to be the calling card from comedians to entertainment to politicians. It's sounding the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're being too sensitive. Meanwhile, put in a similar situation when you touch on their nerves with something that affects them specifically. They're like, it's reverse racism. You're being such and such. And they get all in their feelings, and we're supposed to accept that and adjust.
Exactly, because he goes on to say in a part of the follow-up email, he said, as for preparing our young people for protection against such insults, that too knows no color distinctions. A put down is a put down, period, and they all have unwanted consequences. So Marley, I want to know, because we had some really, really insightful conversation about it. Tell me your thoughts on it and what the issue is with what he's conveying.
When I hear people say these kinds of things, it's definitely a deflection. Like, I know that. Most people of color, Black people in particular, know that. But hearing their comments, their all lives matter, basically, and then being expected to adjust to that, like Dad said, when they don't have to do the same, to me, that's a blatant show of their privilege. And it's just kind of funny to watch how they can say, oh, well, we have all the nuance.
And I think as you said, it is a little funny watching people and their certain ideas, but it's also alarming to see someone who's leading a community of children say something like that, especially when he brought up that Black people also sold Black people into slavery. Yeah. I think that he was using the emails as sort of an outlet to show you how educated he was, and at the same time defend himself, because how dare you say that what I'm talking about isn't relevant? I'm expressing my feelings to someone who wasn't. It's not a conversation between you and I. It was a statement.
Exactly. Thank you for that. That's how it read for me as well, because I'm really struggling with, because it's such a long ass email, I'm really struggling with whether to read the whole thing. But the gist of it, and maybe I will publish it on the show notes page with redacting his name and things that will make it specific to their community, because I don't think that's useful. But it's very much that, Sage, what you said, because it was couched in this framework of, oh, Akila, you're getting emotional, as you said, Chris, and you don't understand, and you're not listening for what's happening here. And online communication is always an issue, that sort of thing. Everything but addressing what we were talking about.
I think this is a kind of hypocrisy or lack of nuance or self-observation that a lot of white people hold, where it's like they can say all the things in the world. They'd be like, you misunderstood me, you have to listen to my feelings. You'd be like, okay. And then you pull that same thing with them and they're like, well, is this really helping the situation though? Like, is this really what we need to hear?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's the inability to recognize that hypocrisy, but still feel like what you're saying is important, not just important, but more important than the other person, is when I know that sometimes you just have to leave them to do their work on their own.
It's also in that same realm where he quotes someone who is basically saying that there's a good idea in every idea. He says that when it seems like you may disagree with him on something.
Yes.
He's telling you to reconsider, which I'm not entirely sure what he was presenting, because the one thing he did say, which was about a survey he wanted to conduct, we said that was a great idea.
Yes.
Because it is.
Yes, because that was an idea I brought up in episode 115, and he said he was going to have the parents do it, which is like, okay, they're going to be doing the work as opposed to gathering information from them and creating it.
The only thing that would have pleased him is like complimenting him sentence by sentence.
Yeah, because he apologized. So he said, okay, thank you for responding, blah, 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 blah. Then he went to online communication can be tricky without the presence of body language and voice and tone and blah, blah, blah. So please know that, and he puts in quotes, thinking that this is something you didn't know because I asked them that, or that you don't address enough would never have occurred to me. And I'm terribly sorry for any distress my words would have or may have invited you to sense. Okay. So he says that in the first paragraph of that second response. And then he says, in general, this is yet another example of the gulf that all parties must learn to bridge, where words can so easily be meant one way and heard another. I'm reminded of one of the exhortations, blah, 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 from the guru of Synetics, and just goes on and on till the break of dawn about exactly what you said, Sage, like standing on this podium, like, let me give you my education. And by the way, I did reach out to a former member of the community, the center that he runs, and which was a Black woman, and her children are no longer there because she dealt with this sort of thing with him, where he would, and I've also spoken to other people in other cities, Black people who are either the only one or one of few in a white-run SDE space, where they feel so worn down because they can't articulate and quote a bunch of people about their feelings. So they get worn down and just pull their child from a space or stop working at a space because white people insist that whenever they're feeling offended by something, that it's because they don't understand where they're coming from, or they need more education about it. Anything but, oh, I hear you. My bad. Let's work on this differently.
The fact that they always pull well, here's my sources card. Here's my little essay on it. And then if you don't do the same thing, it's like, well, you're just in your feelings. So nothing you say makes sense. I mean, especially in an SDE space. I mean, that's so, I don't know, it's just wild to hear, right? Because SDE is supposed to be about managing your emotions and social interactions and how you deal with people outside of the classism or the elitism of academia. So it's like when the only way that you're going to listen to someone is in this one way because that's what makes you comfortable. That's how you feel. Everybody should communicate. It's blatantly discriminatory. It's blatantly, well, I only care about me. And if you don't conform to me, then that's a you problem. So again, how do you not see that, especially in an SDE place?
We want statistics for person-to-person interaction.
How?
Well, let me put on my love-centered hat. So I think in this particular instance, there's bits of whiteness that are being shown, and there's also bits of personality that are coming through, and also basically the trauma from schooling. So his approach to explaining himself and giving credibility and making his statements valid are to reach for things that he feels you as a Black woman can independently assess, things that you can go and read to get an idea of where he was coming from and do these things. So it's like pulling validation from someone else and using that as a way to validate himself to you.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that, as with most things, when you're dealing with people, validation comes from somewhere else other than books. We're taught that to validate your statement, it needs to show up in a book somewhere. That's a fact. Problem with that is that the books that were created, we're now, when other people have a voice, now that other people have a voice and the internet kind of flattened the world in that sense, and other people have a voice, you're coming to find out those books that were published so long ago and that so many people now call fact is not so. It's, in many cases, there were outright lies. And it's difficult. I can imagine. No, it is difficult because I've suffered from the same thing myself. It's hard to come from a place of, okay, I know this to be true, and this is a foundation of my argument, and now it's not true, so does my argument fall apart? Whereas if the approach is, here's the situation, and I know this is factual because it's a human-based thing. This is something that we can relate to because we're human, not because necessarily I'm from one place, you're from another.
Right.
You have a level of education, I have whatever level. It's a human thing. Coming from that space, not too many people have practice in that. A lot of people have practice in pulling quotes,
Yes.
in sending links and doing their due diligence, their research. So I think that email exchange is like an amalgamation of all those issues, the whiteness, the schooling, his own personality.
Yes.
I feel like his need to kind of show you that he's been doing the work. I'm about 2 steps away from calling it an insecurity. I don't want to make that assumption, but it sounds like an insecurity, like somebody's been telling him or has told him before that, where are you getting that from? I don't even know why you would say something like that. Where is that coming from? And maybe he feels like he needs to show receipts for stuff like that.
Right, which is clearly what, such a
And
big
I
part
can
of it.
also
Yeah.
imagine that it would be intimidating to present his opinion as a white male on Black issues to a Black woman who is centered on those issues.
Yeah. And also,
But not
for
intimidating enough to not do the shit, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's always the thing.
Yeah.
I imagine this is probably a part of the nightmare. This is not the way that he wanted it to go.
Exactly.
And I know he
understand.
thinks his point is helpful. I don't think he was coming at you for trying to be aggressive, but then your response showed him that maybe it didn't make as much sense as he thought it did. And that's why he was like, oh, I must have written it in a way that you misunderstood.
Right, because Sage and Marley
Because
and Chris
can't
read it in
possibly
detail.
Not make sense.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Because it's like our conversations, my critique of your mindset, your whatever, is not grounds for you to start talking about everything else that's wrong in your life. I'm not your therapist, bruv. Like, what are we doing here? Let's have the conversation about what we need to actually have the conversation about.
Right, not bringing up all of these other things. Man, see, this is exactly why I needed to have my fam on here, because I was just like angry, or like I was just angry. And one of the things that happened, again, because I have the privilege of hearing from and sometimes being right in front of lots of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who are the only person, non-white person in an SDE space, or whether they're an employee or a volunteer or a family member, like where their kid goes there. And this is exactly what happens all the time. So this idea of, okay, I'm doing my work, right? Because I'm a woke white person, or I'm in an SDE space and I get it. But then the minute something comes up, it's exactly what you said, Sage. It's like, oh, you must not have understood me. Or Marley, I love how you worded it when we talked about it before, where Marley said, so these are like grown-ups who went to like regular school and college and they still don't understand like a basic structure of a conversation. What would you say?
Of an argument. Like, you don't go into debate team or even just debating with someone. You'd be like, cookies are better than brownies. You'd be like, yeah, well, I felt sad once. So
you just brought up a whole, exactly. And he says, and that reminds me of another part that when he says here, I have generalized from that. He brought up some other stuff before, stuff that I said was overlooked and lost, I've generalized to assume that there is value in what someone is suggesting, even if, or maybe especially when, I can't see it for whatever reason. Maybe the idea is coupled with an inflammatory, to me at least, term, and I'm busy reacting to that and thus unable to hear what's worthwhile. Or maybe I'm putting an old label on a new idea and dismissing it erroneously for the same reason. Or maybe I just don't have a good feeling about the speaker and distrust anything that comes out of his or her mouth. Whatever the reason, there's a barrier to my listening and hearing. So essentially that was him offering that advice to me. All of those maybes were all his ways of protecting his statement by saying, maybe I was doing one of these. And as a speaker, I must be particularly careful not to trigger those in others where I'm aware of them.
In the most condescending way passive aggressive way you possibly could.
I also think he's not talking about him, he's talking about you.
That's what I'm saying. He's definitely saying it to me. That's his advice to me.
I don't understand why he wouldn't just say it. Again, I think he's intimidated because you have this large platform. I don't know about how far his reach goes.
That's what I'm saying. Like, this is the worst nightmare.
Yeah.
That we're actually talking about it now. So this is not what he was looking for. You understand? I think also in that regard, I feel like he's really trying to struggle with maintaining that I'm an ally with how I'm feeling about being an ally right now. Like, being an ally most times, I imagine, is you go into it thinking that you're giving something of yourself. So the expectation when you give something of yourself is for people to receive you warmly, to forgive whatever eccentricities you have and just focus on the fact that you're giving of yourself.
Nice to you.
Yeah, basically. But the problem comes in, and I've noticed this too pop up in other larger personalities that call themselves ally, or at least position themselves as allies, is that once they get their button pushed, whatever that button is, they start now reconsidering the whole thing, their whole reasoning behind, well, not reasoning behind, but whether they should actually be doing it, the worth of it. Now, is it worth it? Right? If it takes someone pushing a button and saying something that they don't appreciate about how you delivered the thing or how you're helping, then I would put forth that it was never really about you helping. It was about the feeling that you would get of helping.
Yes.
You get the difference? Like,
yes, it's such a shallow appreciation or a shallow, I wish you guys the best. Like, it's basically thoughts and prayers. It's the thoughts and prayers of actions. Yeah. Good luck, though.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Because he even goes on to say, essentially, no, and this is, I'm quoting here, I'm reading. I was merely trying to say that the Black daycare workers that I was referring to are sometimes just as problematic in the lives of the precious little 3 or 4-year-olds under their care as are the teachers in the most elite private schools.
And I absolutely would not be surprised if this was one of the only episodes of yours that he listened to, because you cover these issues. This is what you talk about.
That's
but also, why wouldn't it be? That's the thing I'm talking about. Again, it's like the whole, like, so we're not human. Like, everybody goes through this.
Right.
It's not a matter of us. And did I say
that? You never said that.
You don't have to, is the point I'm trying to make. Like, you point to the fact that there's nothing inherent in them being Black that means that they don't talk to children like that.
Right.
It's not a matter of race why you talk to children like that. It's a societal norm.
Yes.
Which means everybody in this society, even the people that you maybe feel aren't on the same level in the society, but they're a part of the society. And a part of the societal norm is to deal with children a certain type of way. What difference does it make if it's a Black adult talking to a Black child, doing the same thing that a white adult does to a white child? The issue is not that it was a Black person. The issue is that it was an adult.
Exactly. And this is why I was so floored, as Sage and I were saying. It was confusing at first. I was like, wait, I think this was sent to me because it's my name. He meant to
Yeah.
send it to me. What are we talking about?
I think he's also thinking like there's one group of problematic people, like it's easier for him to accept that, and he's like, whoa, it's not white people because the people next to us
Are
It's
do-
not only.
talk
Yep.
bad.
Mm,
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think he thinks that by you speaking about white people, you're saying, yeah, you guys are the problem, but that's not, in this situation, that's not the whole thing. That's
Right.
not the whole
Yeah.
context. of it.
Exactly.
It seems like he's unable to understand some of this nuance. Like he probably hasn't read enough articles or found enough essays on it. And the only way that you are going to get to understand that is by speaking to people without being like, validate me, please. And if you
Yes.
don't, well, you misunderstood. Bye.
And that
Like,
was
you-
a huge part of the problem, right? That idea of the crux of his argument, and I use that term loosely because it was not an argument, was that I misunderstood, because he even goes on to say, essentially, wait before passing judgment. Not essentially, I keep saying that. I'm reading his thing verbatim here. Wait before passing judgment, and more than that, assume that there's at least a kernel of a good idea, perhaps masked by some faults, and focus first of all on that potentially valuable part of what someone is suggesting. If one focuses on the holes in an idea first, there's a good chance that something really valuable will be overlooked and lost. And that is the passive aggressive shit that I was talking about right there. And as you said too, Marley, it's like his way of saying, I'm not talking to you, but I feel like it's really relevant here because you're really misunderstanding me.
shady.
It's also ironies of irony, because he's saying the very same thing that he's doing. If that was the case, then he should have been able to pull that little nugget that it's not about you. I'm not talking about you in that sense. I'm
And so
talking
it
about
falls
an
apart.
idea. Exactly. So that's the thing that I'm saying. So this is the danger with the schooling aspect of his whole issue, is that it's very easy to stand on a podium and talk down to people and say, you should do this, you should do that.
Mm-hmm.
But then when someone from the crowd shouts up the very same thing you just got finished telling them, the very same thing, try and understand that maybe some of the things that I'm saying may be negative and may hurt your feelings or whatever, but try and pull the nugget from what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Try and pull that. And
Yes.
there's an idea in there that applies to you. Try and pull that. I don't remember him addressing any of that. I don't remember him pointing out, oh, thank you for this nugget. I understood this part of it. No, the approach was, you didn't quite understand where I was coming
Oh,
from.
he said the thank you, which
He
is what
says
makes it
thank
even
you.
more dangerous. Let's say, yeah.
And also,
I'll
very
get back to
early
that.
on, he talks about how he has been reaching out to people in the POC community, like talking to people so that he can get a more nuanced understanding. But this encounter makes me wonder exactly how he spoke to them and what the response was, and if any of the information that he himself pulled was helpful, or
Yeah.
if he just wrote it off as, guess I didn't say anything properly. Like,
Right. I wondered about that as well. And to Chris's point, he definitely said in the first email, he said, as I read that before, I'm sure you won't be surprised to know, I don't think I read that I felt you were looking right at me as you advised well-intentioned white folks. Yes, I did. To make certain that we're engaged at more than a token level. He said that. And then when I followed up and said, why did you feel the need to center yourself as like, I'm doing the work, but also here are these other people that I'm going to yank in front of me? He starts off his response to that with, it is definitely my turn to thank you for taking time to respond in depth, knowing how much you have on your plate, blah, blah, blah. Then he goes into his whole thing. And then at the end, onward. And thank you for your good work and willingness to share your truths with me. This is how I will grow. That is a part of what makes it an issue for me. The fact that he does do the thank you just like he did last time. So it's like a thank you at the beginning and a thank you at the end. And to me, it was like, you think I don't like have any sense? Because you got 42 paragraphs of me, here's what you don't understand. Here's what you can do to listen for the love and da-da-da.
But
And
thank you.
thanks.
But also the thank you isn't that. What I was talking about wasn't the first email. It was after your response, after your pushback,
Okay.
because that's where the work actually starts.
He apologized, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did he apologize for?
He said, as for your thinking behind my previous comments, let me first say that I'm definitely in the group who has a love-hate relationship with online communication, blah, 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 blah. So please know that, I'm terribly sorry for any distress my words may have invited you to
Your
send.
That's,
emotion.
I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yes.
It
it's
is
your emotion.
literally,
I know.
that's-
I'm just
so
trying to
that's
pull all the
way.
pieces
No,
out.
but
y'all.
it's listen. I'll be the only one wearing the love-centered hat here. So you don't have to worry about doing that bit. Okay? So that's the point I was trying to make. It wasn't about him responding to the podcast initially. It's the response after the pushback, which is where Whiteness tends to fall apart, is after the pushback. So that's the part I'm talking about. He didn't thank you. He didn't pull the nugget. He didn't talk about the nugget.
That's true.
He just said thank you. Basically, thank you for talking. Now it's my turn.
That's really true. Yes.
With the whole thank you for sharing your truths thing, I'm wondering why. I mean, I'm pretty sure that he didn't actually accept any of the information that you gave him in your response, because the podcast episode in itself was your truth. And he did not thank you for that in a way that made any sense.
No.
He just prefaced it so that maybe you'd be more comfortable responding to the first email. So
yeah.
It's him trying to be pleasant so that maybe you feel more inclined to speak to him again.
That's what I think too. And it's not my first exchange with him. I've also met him in person. You have as well, I think, Chris. And I've met him a few times in person. And he's also pretty well known as an older white man in the SDE community. So that's a part too that's really disheartening for me. It's like, dude, you've been around for like a long time. Not that that automatically means, as we know, that you would understand the nuance a little more, but it increases the chances. And you're working in a Black community. You've had this space in a Black community for a long time, but it also goes to show, this is why this is the Do Better series, because that's what I want to get to now. What can be done differently? And some of that we've already alluded to, but you operate in this blackety black ass community, right? And you ran SDE spaces even before you were in this community, in the case of this particular person. And still, your reaction to this thing is to try to tell me that I didn't understand, that I need to listen more from a space of love and pull the nuggets and do a whole bunch of work. And thank you for using your words out loud.
Thank you for talking.
Thank you for talking. So y'all, let's get a little bit specific as we close out here. What should he have done if he was really benefiting from the episode and really listening and not trying to defend himself and articulate whatever the hell? What could have been done differently?
The first time or the second time?
Throughout
The one at a time, them, any of them. Yeah.
I think first off, being straightforward when you disagree with someone is the best thing to do, because then we can directly address and come to an understanding instead of you being passive aggressive and like weirdly
condescending
and like trying to get a good rep first before you break down their ideals.
They need to see y'all can't see the physicality here of what's happening. Yes. Thank you for that. Marley?
Yeah, so what should he have done? I mean, my answer is not a damn thing. Like, just say thank you for the episode. Keep it moving. If you have some sort of questions or some sort of internal thoughts, first of all, why is this my problem? Like, if you really, really, like, in the bottom of your heart want to be an ally, think about, why am I going to her with this?
Yes.
And am I just asking? Because you don't, I can't believe I'm giving someone the same advice y'all always give me. You don't need to argue everything. You don't need to have a response
oh my God,
for
Chris,
everything. Just take it, and you're like, that don't make no sense. Be like, okay, thanks, leave. Think it over without having to run it past the person without their consent. Because, like, you weren't there to be his therapist.
Yes. And you start off by saying you appreciate me taking time.
Great.
And then you took up a lot more of my time. I'm trying not to cuss y'all because I want y'all to be able to spread this episode a lot more. Like, you took up much more of my time that you claimed you valued by explaining a bunch of things to me that were not, I repeat, sir, because I'm hoping you're listening, not related at all.
But also, in my opinion, posing the question in the first email, whatever that question was.
The one that I asked him?
No, I'm saying like the first email.
Mm-hmm.
The contents were iffy, but feeling like you can pose a question to me is not an issue, especially because it's an email. I don't have to respond.
Yes. And I asked people to respond to that episode too.
So that was not an issue for me.
Not at all.
The contents and the attitude. So
yes.
When white people, and I'll let Dad go to it next, but I feel like when white people aren't entirely comfortable with something that a Black person is saying, they get to they immediately go to devaluing their time and the Black person's time, their effort, their everything. Because it's like, well, it's disposable for me. I don't agree, so no, let's sit down and talk about it. Never mind that he acknowledged multiple times that you have things to do.
Yeah.
You have places to be.
You're an SDE mommy.
Right. It means nothing to me when you're like, well, I understand that you have so much time, but let me give you my essay.
Nom 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 all
Right.
of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Akila, you and I have talked about this before about the trouble that we as people in a society face dealing with things that are reality based and things that are like kind of social hiccups. This for me is a very big social hiccup mixed with whiteness. A lot of the talking, the niceties and the rubbing of the shoulders from email, from what I gather, is like, oh, thanks for doing this. Thanks for taking the time, blah, blah, blah. The way it was written, I haven't been used to seeing anything like since college.
It was 3 seconds away from being a Wikipedia page.
Yeah. I mean, even the formatting, you understand? So what I'm saying is like, I tried to not take it as literal as it is because I don't really think he really cared about your time in that sense.
Clearly.
So, right. So I will not even deal with that part of it. I think it's a social nicety, right? The thing that I focused on is the story that he was telling to get his point across. He made his point clear in the beginning that he wasn't okay with the idea like it was only white people essentially treating black children this way.
Even though I never said that. Mm-hmm.
Right. But when you strip away all the social niceties, that's what it comes out to. So for me, for that to have come across better, or not come across better, but to be more useful for everybody involved and not just him, I think the first thing would be to take a breath before you go ahead and get on the keyboards. Like, take some time to really consider what it is you're railing against. What is the point? If the point is to let me know that there are black adults that have a similarly oppressive effect on black children, trying to put myself in his position, I don't see how I couldn't suss that out from what you have said in previous episodes, even in the same episode.
Right.
Like, it's not, again, what you were talking about wasn't a black-white issue. It was an adult-child issue. Bringing up the fact that other black teachers or black adults are talking to black children like that, I don't see the relevance.
Well, to interrupt there, it was a black-white issue or white by POC issue because that episode was specifically about the ways that whiteness can be problematic in black spaces. Like, you being a white person in a black or brown community running this center and ways that you specifically, because you are white and don't have certain exposure and experience, can make it difficult or even impossible for BIPOC folks to feel safe and comfortable in the spaces that you run.
Right.
So I want to make that clear.
Right. But
that it was.
I get what the point of the podcast was.
That episode, yeah.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is like the response to it, to bringing up the fact that there are black people, black adults doing the same thing. For me, the two don't go together. They don't match up. One has nothing to do with the other.
His point wasn't, or his example was a false equivalent.
Yes.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Like, so it wasn't the fact that he brought that up to me in analyzing that brings up across the point that he wasn't paying attention to his role in the thing. He's paying attention to what are the observations he can make that doesn't make him look that bad.
Totally understand you now. And that's how it became that's where he varied from the whole point.
He went completely off road for what that was about. So for me, how it could have been dealt with differently is to take the time to really structure what it is that you want to say. And like both the girls said, talk about what you're actually talking about and stop trying to spend the time playing nice. Say what it is that you feel and deal with the consequences therein. Trying to play footsie with words.
And educate me on all the things that I don't know with links and
that's
whatnot.
the whole area where I think the whiteness really jumped out, you know? 'Cause it's like, you're doing all this just so that you can avoid looking bad or avoid feeling bad.
Yes.
How does this help me? The answer is it doesn't.
That's right.
Also, a lot of people put not being fake about stuff with being rude. And it's not the same. I just want you to get to the point.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if you claim you value my time.
Right.
That's not
And again, this is a pattern with this particular person because Just like every time before I say yes to a gig, y'all know this, I'm always checking in like what's going on in your community with BIPOC folks. Who can you put me in contact with? Or who do I already know? Forget about, because I don't know who you're going to put me in contact with, but I still ask. But I always reach out to my networks to talk to BIPOC folks in those communities. And so this is all of the things that made me feel like I'm definitely going to publish this shit right here because it's a pattern of his. And I also recognize it from being in other spaces that it is a pattern with whiteness where BIPOC folks feel swallowed up by all of the research and the details and the whatever when they're just trying to express why something doesn't make them feel safe or okay in a space.
And then white people, when you expect them to do the exact same thing for you, it becomes a whole other issue of, well, this is not a black-white problem. That's reverse racist, like what Dad said. That nonsense that no one is ever going back to. That's reverse racist.
Yes.
That's prejudice. That's whatever.
And this is why we cannot deny, even though race is a social construct, this is why we cannot deny that reality, because it isn't about your individual experience. It is about a collective shared experience with Black not being a monolith at the same time. Yes, it's nuanced. We know, try to stay with it. Even though we're all different, there's still certain things that come in terms of privilege and in terms of oppression that come with whiteness and Blackness. So whatever it is that you experience individually matters, but it doesn't change the reality of the world that we live in. The same way that we could say money is not the thing that we care about, but we still got to work.
Right. Everybody want to make money.
Right. Or we want some of the things that money gives, because I don't care about
Because
making money.
Who cares about the paper? It's what it does. So even, for instance, like things in your bank account, those aren't physical things. They're not based on gold. It's just ones and zeros.
Yes.
Right? So it was never about the money in that sense. It was about what the money can get.
Yes.
True.
And that, I think, is where things kind of fall apart and break apart, is that it's like playing multi-dimensional chess. You're having to deal with things on many different fronts at the very same time, and giving people the room to say something like, well, it's not that, and then focus on that one thing. Never mind everything else that's going on around me.
Yes.
Just that one thing, so we can fight about that, and we can argue the points, and I can show you the research on this and this and this. But while we're doing that, we're not focusing on the actual thing that brought us here.
Right.
The fact that you decided that what you pulled from an episode made you think, you know what I need to bring to her attention that maybe she doesn't quite understand is that Black people do this to each other too.
And when white people say we have bigger issues at hand, when you talk about literally anything as a Black person, that's what they mean. They mean, well, let's talk about something where I can feel right.
That's right. Because the fact that he ended, and I'm going to end it on this too, the fact that he ended by saying that Black people enslaved other Black people or helped other Black people become enslaved. That is the epitome of what the hell, sir. Sir. Like, he actually felt like that was useful, because it says, and I quote, "On one final related point, on the same day I received your email, he made a big deal out of the fact that one of the major facilitators of slavery was the fact that many African tribal leaders were perfectly willing to make a lot of money off of selling their people or their neighbors to the slavers. Many of those taken into slavery were not captured by whites, but by their own people."
But who do you think took that concept? It doesn't matter whether they physically captured them or not, because they took them somewhere and enslaved.
By whom?
I don't care
Who started
how
this whole thing.
And how is that relevant to now? Just as you said, right?
I love how he specifies it's a related point. No, it's not.
It is, ironically. I don't think it's related in the way that he thought, but it actually is related. It's related in the sense that he's using, again, a white supremacist understanding of slavery. You hear white people talk about this all the time, that Black people had slaves. Arabs had Black slaves. And
Black on Black crime.
Yeah, while all this is true, the part that you neglected to dig a little deeper to understand the full context of what was going on is that the slavery in Africa, there's been no slavery like American slavery.
Yeah.
There's none. It doesn't exist. There hasn't been an instance where, as slaves, you can have a child and your child is automatically a slave.
Right.
It's
Even
a white
It was
term
indentured servitude.
or
kind of
different
thing.
things.
and that's basically what it
Which
was.
is why I don't say slave anymore either. I say enslaved. People who were enslaved, because even labeling people as slaves with the enormity of how it happened
Yeah, the
specifically.
weight.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a white term.
But that's the point I'm
sense.
trying to make. Is like he is bringing it. It does make sense. He just not how he
Not how
intended
he
it.
thought.
Because if you dig a little deeper, you realize that the type of slavery that existed in Africa is more like indentured servitude. When you try and use the idea that because of the term that they coined, by the way, when you use the same term on such hugely different experiences, you just kind of whitewash the whole thing. Yeah, you just say, oh, it's all the same. It's not all the same. Those people, when they sold they thought in their mind, their idea of slavery was once you work, you do what you need to do, you can walk away not a slave. The white version of slavery is the only time you're not a slave is when you're in the ground. That's right. That's when you're not a slave anymore.
Your baby, yes.
You understand? So for him to bring that point up and use it in the way that he did highlights his whiteness and highlights the point, the opposite point of what he was trying to make, is that he doesn't quite understand, but he's using terminologies to make himself feel better. It's all about him feeling better. It's not about what he's actually saying.
At the second, I agree more and more with the insecurity.
Yeah. That's how it comes across. Yeah. Like the more you talk to people, actually not even talking to people, the more you listen to people talk. So sometimes it's better not to engage, but to listen to other people engaging with one another. The more you listen to people talk to other people, you get to recognize the things that are ingrained, the things that they were taught, and the things that how they actually feel. The guy in the email, I get the impression that he was in his circle. Higher education was very important. And it was very important that how you receive and how you deal with information gives you some sort of social standing. Mm-hmm. Maybe informally, but you get some level of social standing from it. What's not important is the emotional part of it or the not so publicized part of it. That part he seems to have trouble with, because when your mom wrote back and said, hey, why do you think I wouldn't understand these concepts? Like, why do you think I don't know that Black parents or Black adults talk to Black children the same way? Oh, let's just pivot and go somewhere else now. Because we don't want to talk about that because I'm at a deficit when it comes to that. Let's bring up something else that shows that I'm woke.
But not before devaluing what you're saying by saying things like, you probably didn't understand. Yeah. It's important to listen. It's important for you to listen for the love in a thing. It's try to pull the nuggets out from it.
Probably just upset.
Yeah. And as you said, not saying any of that directly, but saying it all. I'm reminded of, and this is what I used to do.
But those are all the bits and pieces. That's what I'm saying. Like, those are all the bits and pieces of what, and we talk about this all the time too, like how multifaceted each individual is. Like the experiences that they have, as well as and a lot of times, because it dictates that, the skin that they wear. All those bits and pieces goes into a person, and we only get small bits of interactions with them.
Yeah.
So when we deal with that, we are having to deal with our experience and their multitude of experiences and trying to come to some level of understanding. So in some instances, I can honestly see a thing where it's just him being ill-informed and not having the experience and the understanding. I get that. There's parts in there that I can't say it's completely his whiteness that does it. It's a personality issue. Mm-hmm. But there are other parts that I'm like, that's completely whiteness, clearly. Other part of it is that's completely your schooling, your approach, your thought process, how you decided what was important and what wasn't. That type of stuff shows up and it's clear. But to kind of say it's all one thing, we'd be falling into the same approach that he did.
Yeah. Right. Any closing bits from anybody, or y'all feel good?
I'm good.
I'm good. I'll find another way to talk about this someday.
Mr. X, wherever you are, don't be mad, or just take it. Try and pull the nuggets.
Try to listen from a space of love, and everything that you said in the message, read it to yourself seriously, because ultimately the reason that I have lots of spaces, thankfully, to vent about things that piss me off. This wasn't the point of this episode. The point of it was to offer an opportunity to make a change for somebody to listen to this and maybe hear themselves and their own issues in it. And also to hold space and to amplify the voices of so many BIPOC folks who have to deal with this every day, not just in an email, but in person. Like maybe you as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, your kid goes to an SDE center right now where you're dealing with that all the time. Cause I know for a fact that that's happening, because I get those messages from people all the time, like far more than I'm happy with.
Right.
All the time I get these messages. So I want y'all to take this in Obviously, I want you to share this and I want to continue the discussion around it. I'm going to do that over on patreon.com/Akila, of course. And also when I publish this episode on Instagram at Fear of the Free Child, I want your perspectives, whoever you are, whether you're showing up in black skin or white skin or whatever. I do want this conversation to continue, because what I'm not going to do is just like be pissed off and keep that to myself and like my loving family who takes all of my frustrations like, okay, mom, let's talk about it. I wanted to do more than that. So I really hope that you can get, you being anybody listening, that you can get the importance of this conversation happening out loud. Also, don't ask me to tell you who he is, because that doesn't feel important, but I am going to publish a lot of aspects of the email itself verbatim. And I'm really hoping that this helps to expand the dialogue and also build that sense of nuance that we keep talking about, so that we're not out here low key and high key doing this toxic shit, because we got to do what, y'all? We got to do better. All the details will be on the show notes page, raisingfreepeople.com/120. We absolutely continued this conversation. And if you are part of my Patreon community, you'll get possibly video if that works out right, but certainly audio around why I chose not to share his name. We had a really good conversation about that. So, dude, thank you for being an avatar, as Sage said, for all the other people who are doing a similar thing. So now you can feel like this exchange was useful. You didn't get your point across in the way that you thought, but boy, was your email and our email exchange useful in expressing what not to do and how we can do better. Much love. Chat to you next week.